Welcome to Lessons Earned in D&I Conversations with. And today I'm so pleased to tell you that we have Brian Richardson Jr. with us today, who's the new Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Colts. And I am over the moon about it. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, let me brag on you just a little bit. Like I said, Brian's with the Colts. He's the new Director of DEI. He has set up successful DEI programs throughout the country that he's left and years later are still running successfully and have expanded. He teaches DEI. And one of the coolest things about him, I think, other than all of that, is his wife is an epidemiologist. So she's basically a COVID hero. And now that you know him, like I know him, let's get into it. So when we've spoken before, you've told me, because I was geeked out that you're with the Colts. As a lifelong Hoosier, absolutely excited about the Colts. And I asked you, did you geek out as bad as I did, even being this close to you? So what are some of the things that you walked in the building? Are you over it yet? Just the majesty of the Colts, or are you still in awe?
I'm still in awe. This is now, I started back in December. Here we are in March, and I still feel like it's the first day. Every time I walk in, it feels brand new. It feels unreal. As I was sharing with you, there's still moments where I can tell I'm being watched by security because they have the cameras everywhere. But like I'm walking through with like my phone and like taking selfies in front of like jerseys and stuff. Like I'm fanning out. Like, you know, I'm seeing things that, you know, as a kid I only saw on TV. And now to be walking the halls and see the history and the legacy that's there, it's a point of pride. And, you know, I hope that never wears off.
So when I was researching you, which I did quite a bit, because you're a TEDx speaker, which was amazing. I would recommend to anyone to go watch your talk.
Thank you.
I wondered how you got into diversity. Was it your natural interest, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, diversity work as a profession and something that found me. That prior to the profession, it was something that I was living, you know, going through different experiences of being the only person of your identity group represented in any space, right? So I've lived through that. And the difference between now and then is not having the language to put with the experiences that would happen, right? And how I would process and kind of probe through to move forward and shift the needle even in those spaces. So when I became now a professional and kind of walked into this, I think it was a situation where the profession chose me. That when I started off, there were options of roles that we could take as a new professional, right? So I was hired in for a role, and then in addition to that role, there was another job that we were given, and the options were career resources related, because again, my background was in higher education, so my path was to go down the road of career services or all government or multicultural affairs. And I look back and I laugh now, but it was a situation where my skill set matched the needs of the organization, and the choice was chosen for me. That because of that background, I was shifted towards multicultural affairs, even though it wasn't my first option, because as a new professional, I tried to be very intentional in my pathway or my professional pursuits, and I didn't want to be pigeonholed in one particular area. And at least starting off, I was hesitant to dive into diversity because I didn't want to be seen as the black guy who can only do diversity. But after years in the job, it became my passion of finding ways to speak truth to power, or how do you make individuals lean into those uncomfortable conversations? How can you present it in a manner where, regardless where you're entering into the conversation, that you walk away from it with a little bit more enlightenment, right? If you're someone who already gets it, how can I provide a little bit more there? For someone in the middle who's still trying to figure out, well, where do I start? What do I do? I don't want to make a mistake. How can I provide some type of a roadmap or some blueprints for those who are completely disengaged with the conversation? How can I spark some interest or open that door, right? Because as we talk about moving forward and in creating these vehicles of change, there's room in this vehicle for change for everybody depending on where you are on that continuum, right? And I'm going to need those who are completely disengaged to find some interest.
So what tips have you found to get folks to lean in? Because these could be, unfortunately, really uncomfortable situations or questions. Asking the question and hearing the answer. So how do you get that lean in?
I think every situation is going to look different. And oftentimes we find those missteps. So when you try to take one approach that works somewhere else, and you try to make it work the exact same way in this environment. So my approach is always come in as a humble learner. And I say that, and what I mean by it is I don't know what I don't know. And what I don't know when I'm new in an environment is the culture. What are the specific needs of where we are? And in that process of learning the things that I don't know, I need to hear the stories. I need to hear the stories from those who are having the best experience, who have no issues, who have nothing to complain about. I need to hear the issues of, it's cool. It's all right to be here. Everything's fine. And then I also need to hear those experiences of those who are like, I'm just here to collect a check. Or it is what it is, right? The people who've normalized different behaviors. I need to hear all of that so I can have a better understanding of what moving forward looks like. Developing an action plan where moving forward centers the most marginalized experiences. So now we can set up the organization or company or entity to be proactive now moving forward. That what moving forward looks like will make sure that we address some of those issues that some people are experiencing, whether it's being seen, whether it's being heard, whether it's feeling included, whether it's being validated in their experiences. I think oftentimes we can find ourselves discounting those polar groups, right? So those are overly like, oh yeah, that's good, we expect that. Those are great. When you get the opposite end, it's like, oh, that's just that negative person, or that's that disgruntled person. For me, there's validity across the scale, right? Those outliers tell us a lot, whether they're positive or negative. It gives us an insight as to sometimes the things that we don't want to acknowledge. And how I do the work is, if I hear that, then now how can we be active and proactive about what moving forward looks like? Invite them and create opportunities for the most marginalized to feel as if they can be a part of what moving forward looks like, to salvage that experience so we can increase the likelihood that they'll stay, the likelihood that they'll recommend working here for anyone else, right? And then that improves the work environment and the work culture. When every person knows that, regardless what I look like, or regardless how I identify, or regardless what my role is within this organization, that I play a key role here, that I'm an important piece to the puzzle. And now, because we're acknowledging all the experiences, the next person that comes in that either looks like them or identifies the way that they do, that their experience will be slightly better than the one before. And then that's how we continue to keep pushing the needle forward.
I really like what you just said, because what I heard was ensure that everyone can bring their whole selves to work. Make sure that everyone feels included, and that, in DEI work, we talk a lot about recruiting. We talk a lot about the hiring process, but I think we can overlook retention. And to me, retention is just as important. So when we talk about how we make sure that everyone has not just a seat at the table, but a voice at the table, how have you found bringing in marginalized folks that have heard a lot of public statements on DEI, but maybe don't, and rightly so, feel as though that they can speak at the table, even if they're in the room?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because I think that too is something that's going to change depending on the individual, right? understanding power and privilege and the dynamics in the workplace. It may not be safe for me as a new employee or someone who doesn't have the tenure or the rank behind my job title to speak up and actually share. So what I found over the course of my career is how can I utilize my voice and my positionality when I walk into those rooms where I frequently find myself as, either the youngest person in the room or the only person of color. I walk into those spaces feeling an obligation. And that obligation being, how can I make obvious the things that I see to others in the room? And, this is something I teach in my class of when we enter into these spaces, are we actively looking around in those spaces? And what we're looking for is who's here, what's the makeup, so we can actively see who isn't represented here or who's overrepresented. And then how can we then bring that to the awareness of everybody, right? Because once you see it, then now it becomes something that we have to act on, right? That if I can say, oh, well, if we're having this conversation around recruitment or retention, but the room is all homogeneous, I then have an opportunity to say, are there other people here who can contribute to the conversation, right? That gives that moment where we now see something that may have been overlooked and overthought or not fully recognized because it hasn't been a conscious thought. That we're coming here, we're all good people, we all have the best intentions, but it just so happens that we also all look the same. We all identify the same way. So inherently, there are going to be some voices and some perspectives that aren't going to be recognized right away. But what I find is that when we have that moment to look back and take a step back and say, hey, what perspective don't we have here? All right? Because again, the most well-intended people can still have some missteps. And even if we're doing everything in their favor for the groups that aren't represented, we still can have some missteps. So instead of speaking on behalf of other people, how can we find more ways to get them into the room so they can speak on behalf of their own experiences? And this kind of goes towards another piece of the conversation that we share too of, so where do we start, right? Do we do the pre-work? Do we get the space ready first? Or do we just go all in and just bring in diverse groups into the workplace? And I don't believe that you have to do either or, but do an and. Do the pre-work so there is space that is created, because there will be members, whether it's intentional or not, there'll be members of the in-group and the out-group. And how that's defined, that's going to look different depending on the work environment, right? So if we're actively looking for ways to bring more people and create this in-group synergy, and if that synergy can be around, oh, well, we're all one brand, and this is our brand, here's what we stand on, we're also going to acknowledge that there are going to be different experiences that are brought into because people are bringing their whole selves to work. So we'll create the space where individuals can share openly. But to get there, trust has to be built. You also have to be willing to hear that this person has been othered or they're having a different experience than the majority. So once you hear that, then how can we act on it? Well, we did our pre-work. We created space, so we have anonymous opportunities to report situations of bias. We have ongoing training and dialogue around difficult conversations. And then we're also going to go all in and make sure that when we're recruiting for different positions, that we're putting things in addition to our normal places. We're seeking out those avenues where there are pockets of populations that feel more comfortable going to these sites or to these spaces. And then we'll be a consistent face in those spaces and say, hey, we're friendly here. All right. As opposed to going that one time and say, oh, well, it just didn't work out. The results didn't turn out in our favor. Consistency, commit to it. And that's the beauty of doing this thing called diversity. It's a marathon. This is not a sprint. So you got to commit to it and then reevaluate, reassess. You got to step in it because you're going to make some mistakes along the way. And you got to keep doing it. You got to keep learning.
That's such good advice and such good stuff. And I love that you said that we're going to step in it, because we are. Mm-hmm. And you can't do this work without stepping in it. I've stepped in it, and part of it, we can teach, take the feedback. It's not personal, accept it, You would never want to make another person uncomfortable, but don't personalize it. But these are uncomfortable conversations. And I think building an expectation that you may step in it. And so you have to be willing to say, I'm sorry, or tell me how I can be better. And not even tell me how I can be better, just I'm sorry, and I will do better.
Yep.
I'm sorry,
that's the perfect way right
better.
There, right? That instead of, so I stepped in between us and, tell me now why I messed up. That's another offense on top of what I already did, right?
That's right.
But if you tell me that I've wronged you, then instead of me now trying to justify how I'm a good person or how I'm not filling the blank of these different tropes, right? Mm-hmm. The best thing that I can do is apologize because I see that I've caused harm. And then I move forward, right? So now I take that as a gift and thank you because you gave me a level of consciousness that I didn't possess before. So now the next time I'm faced with this situation, that's going to be a recalled thought now that I can continue to do the same thing that I did before and have a possible reaction like what I just saw. Or I could choose my words differently. I can choose my actions differently. I can see what I've learned from this situation. I can also dive deeper into the context of, well, I said this or I did this. This was offensive to this person. Let me go do some research on how or why this is offensive. And that's the self-work, right? Instead of telling them or asking them rather, why did I offend you? Or why is this a bad thing? Or why are you so upset when it comes to this? I can do my self-work.
That's absolutely right on. Because asking someone to tell you why you've upset them is, to your point, part of the wrong.
And that could come from an innocent place, right? Again, these good people can make these mistakes. That I could be the most conscious person, I could be the wokest person, or I could be the pro, all of these things, but we're going to make mistakes along the way. With the nuances of language and how societal norms are being shattered and changed, things that were once acceptable and possible by policy and law are now long from that, right? So that's a part of that marathon. You got to constantly check your blind spots. You got to constantly look for opportunities to learn how to do better. And, take that journey and commit to the journey of unlearning, right? So unlearning how we once were socialized or conditioned to see the world and make sense of it, right? Recognizing that there are other realities.
Do you find that in doing this work that your outlook or position has evolved over time? So would the Brian now recognize the Brian then when you started? Do you think?
There's been a lot of growth. I am not by any shape of the imagination a polished product right now, so I myself am still under construction. But where I am now is a product of those who poured into me, those who corrected me along the way, those who were patient with me, and also a desire to learn the work. So seeking out what are the things that make me feel uncomfortable and leaning into that, right? So sitting in that uncomfortableness and asking, well, why is it that you're uncomfortable when we talk about these things or do these things or around these types of people? Where does that come from? And then being so, inquisitive in nature to say, I don't have everything that I need to know to formulate an opinion about this. So how I've been shaping my vision or perspective of the world has also come from a place of ignorance, right? So to do better is to know better. Right? And that was something I learned from my grandma. She said, well, baby, once you know better, you do better. So once I become enlightened, then now I have the power at that point, right? That I can now act with the understanding of how these things can cause harm, or I could choose to do the same things before and ignore that. And then I also have that opportunity to take this newfound lesson to pass it on to somebody else, to pull back that curtain, right? So they start to see the things and kind of pop the bubble for them. So you can no longer say, well, I didn't know. Yes, you did. We talked about it yesterday. You were at the training. I understand.
I think because I think there's so much tension and everyone doesn't want to be this or they don't want to be that. And so just to your point, setting up an environment and setting up a space that's safe enough to say, we understand everyone wants to do the right thing. We understand everyone wants to be an ally. However, this is what that looks like. And that can sometimes, a lot of times, look uncomfortable for you personally. Because as we're growing, that growth is not positivity all the time. Growth is not comfortable all the time. Growth
and
is...
Labels aren't fun. No one wants to be labeled. Racists don't want to be labeled as racists. You know, like, don't place that. There's these negative connotations with these words, right? So if I, in my heart of hearts, believe that I'm a good person, when I hear you call me any of those labels that have the negative connotations, I'm going to shut down and go defensive, and I'm going to resort to, well, let me tell you how I'm not, or why I'm not, or why you're wrong. And then in that process, it leads towards tokenization of people, right? So you frequently hear, oh, I got that friend that fills that category to show that you aren't these things, right? So how can we talk about behaviors as opposed to demeaning a person, right? That I can say, hey, the acts that you did made me feel this way. I'm not calling you a fill in the blank, right? Let's talk about the behavior and let's see how we can move forward.
So the focus on the behavior is really where it should be at, not the person. Not.
But that's hard. That's hard to do. It's hard to do. It's hard to separate the two, right? Mm-hmm. How can we have an open and honest conversation about the actions if the parties aren't focused on the actions? If we're more conscious or focus on the words that you're using or how you're talking, right? Then I'm not listening to the message. I'm focused on you flailing your arms because you're upset or you're passionate about something. So I'm not hearing what you're saying, right? And then that leads to all of the other stereotypes too. Or I've been wronged so much that I'm not even interested in hearing what you have to say. I'm tired.
This isn't easy work, like you said, and it's such a marathon, and the best kind of marathon, because the only thing, I mean, to be able to talk about these things and you get to impact people in a positive way. So it's a gift and a blessing to be able to do this. What advice would you give people, whether they're starting out or they have years of experience in doing this work with compassion fatigue, and how do you keep going?
So my message would be, know that what you're doing, that if it comes from a place of, I feel as if I'm called to do the work, or if I see true value in doing the work, then when it doesn't come with the recognition, you're doing the work for the right reasons, right? It's not going to be glorified. It's not going to be thanked. It's not going to be appreciated right away. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to piss people off because it's uncomfortable. But growth typically happens when you're not comfortable, right? If things are all good and everybody's comfortable, then what's going to spur us to actually want to do something different or to see a different perspective? Why do I care about something that doesn't directly impact me or people within my circle, right? That's something else that we also have to, understand that when we're talking about the different components related to diversity, helping a person understand the role of an ally, and even pushing past allyship and creating those accomplices, right? How do you do that?
Much better. That's a much better word.
How do you do that? Because everybody can be an ally now, and front facing say, hey, I support this. But then are you keeping that same energy when the cameras are off, when the attention isn't on it, when it's no longer the trending topic? Are you still there saying, hey, I support you, and I'm going to stand there with you and take everything that comes with it? That's the part where that battle fatigue sets in, right? That's the part where, those different syndromes, imposter syndrome that it sets in. Like, oh, why am I doing this? No one cares about it. No one's interested in it. I'm losing friends. I'm losing sleep. What are going to be the things that you can recognize at the individual level of what's my why? And how can I get back to my why? Why am I doing this? Why did I take this journey? Why am I doing this work? Recognizing your why pushes you through that. And then also finding ways to do more coalition building. Well, the work does not just fall on your shoulders. Because as we saw, there have been a lot of companies, corporations, industries who've all invested in diversity. It's a long time coming. We should have been done it, right? And I think that that's the first step. The next few steps after that is let's continue to build. Let's expand that. We can't just hire one person and say, hey, we've done our deeds. Look at us. We are great. They're going to fix everything. If you aren't checking in on that one person that you hired and asking them what they need and how can we continue to push forward to create sustainable change, then I would recommend you checking in on that person and seeing how they're doing. To go back to our conversation earlier of that recruitment and that retention piece, that burnout is real. So what does self-care look like at the individual level? How can you build a supporting team around you to encourage you, but then also to take what the mission is and how we're building out these efforts, but to apply it in other parts within the organization too, so everyone sees how this is an integral piece of the work that we do as a whole, that it should be something that permeates through the entire system. So hang in there. Hope is possible, but it's also okay to be tired, and it's okay to ask for help.
Thank you so much for talking with us today. It was completely invaluable. I just really appreciate your time and all of your insights. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.